we would rotate through different dorm rooms every day if needed. Some days we were able to sleep, and some days there would be no sleep at all. During this event, I had not been able to sleep for at least 2 days in a row, and finally, after a long day, I made my way up the stairs to the dorm room. There were 5 dorm rooms in the area, all complete with a twin bed, bedside table, and closet. The closest 4 were always used before the last one, located way in the back of the old building. Unfortunately for me, I was staff member number 5 that night, and also the last one person to get a room. I entered the room, though, and closed the door and hopped on the creaky old bed, and sleep happened immediately. All of a sudden, though, I woke up in the middle of the night at some stage. I was completely paralyzed to the point of almost not being able to breathe. My head was facing towards the old wooden door entering the room, and the door started to creak open very slowly. A tall, dark, white figure entered the room, and the figure appeared to have some sort of a big black cloak. A hood was covering its head too, and it moved to the corner of the room and started resonating a slow, low-toned chuckle. In the darkness, I could see that it was bearing a wide, white smile. And then it said, "Finally, someone new." And it started coming toward me, continuing to chuckle, and I could feel it lay on top of me, making it even more difficult to breathe. It felt so heavy and cold on top of me, and I could even feel the sharp black fabric on the back of my neck and arms. My heart was racing so fast at this point, and finally, after what felt like forever, it got off the top of me and stood back up, and it walked back through the open door whispering, "Come back soon," ultimately disappearing from sight. I woke up that morning thinking that was the most messed up and realistic dream that I've ever had in my life. I looked up towards the door and I realized something. The door, it was open. Rationalizing it with myself, I assumed that maybe somebody opened it last night by accident or something. I walked downstairs and I just made myself some coffee. One of the other employees made their way into the kitchen and sat down at the table, and I told her about my crazy nightmare or sleep paralysis episode or whatever the heck it was, and as I progressed through my story, the look on her face became just more and more concerned. Finally, when I finished my story, she explained to me that the same exact thing happened to her in the same room a month prior. She described the dark figure perfectly, from the black cloak with the hood to the wide white Cheshire-ish smile. Finally, another older employee entered the kitchen, and he had overheard some of the conversation prior, and he filled up a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, and he said, "So you found out why nobody sleeps in the old room? We've all made that mistake once." This happened around 4 or 5 years ago, and it still gives me the creeps when I think about it, and I give you my word that it's true. So I was on my way home from the football in the city with a couple of friends, and our night finished up, and we hopped on the train back to the burbs. I saw off my buddies as they all live on stops before me, and I'm the last along the line in our group, and my house is in between stations, and it's pretty much directly in the middle, so it's a reasonable 20-minute walk home either way. This night I decided to walk home along the beachside nature track, and it's like a 50 to 100 meter wide, couple of kilometers long, untouched nature reserve that runs parallel to the train tracks. And I did it to get a bit of a nature fix, even though it was a bit of a windy night. So I'm a couple of 100 meters in, and I'm suddenly aware that I can hear masses of what just sounded like loud conversations swirling around me. A lot like being in a crowded room and hearing a lot, but not being able to pick up on anything, if you know what I mean. But the problem is that there was absolutely no one around, and it's about 1 a.m, so I stop in my tracks and stand still to focus and strain my ears, and I look up at the sky, and as I'm watching, the trees sway heavily in front of me, and I'm focused hard and notice that the conversation seems to be amongst the trees, and it's getting louder too. As soon as I come to this realization, the wind stops, and the trees just come to a complete still halt. Well, the hairs on the back of my neck come up at the unnatural stillness as I make out a voice amongst the trees through the silence, and They say, hey, this one can hear us. Well, after that, I had had enough and I bolted home without my feet touching the ground. I take the roadway home these days, and on a side note, unrelated or not, this part of the train line between stations is known as the suicide bend of our line, and there's been so many that I've honestly lost count. A side note too is that I'm still unsure if these things or energies or whatever the heck it was are related to the activity that I've experienced in my house for years now. So 2 days ago, I was with my friends at a party. Everything was going well, and it was a bit boring for me because I can't actually drink. I have stomach problems. But nevertheless, we had some fun, left the party early, and went to a friend's house to chill. After a couple of minutes, I heard some of his friends came in to join us. Several hours passed, and because it was getting very late, I actually wanted to leave to go home, and some friends of his decided to take me home in the car, and before we reached the car, we saw several men out in front of the car. Many who obviously looked drunk, but I wasn't expecting any kind of trouble, so as I walked past the car to get to the back seat, waiting for the owner to let me in, a man approached me from that group and told him to get inside the house because he was needed by someone. It appeared to me that the owner knew this guy because he did exactly that without opening the car or telling me anything. I just kind of stood there for a couple of seconds and then decided to walk back into the house to see if he's still willing to take me home or if I should just go home on my own. I actually had my driver's license suspended due to an accident a few years ago. So I went into the house and couldn't see the owner anywhere and said goodbye again to some friends while I was thinking of my journey home because the public transport at that hour doesn't really work. It was about 4 a.m. I think. I live in Eastern Europe, by the way, and I don't know if in the US the public transport system differs. But in that same time, a man that was outside apparently walks in the house with 2 more guys, and it actually catches my attention this time. He had medium brown darkish hair, slim with loose clothes, very common looking. That wasn't the thing that caught my attention. But when he entered the house, I just had this strong feeling coming from him that I just can't describe that well. He looked at me and he had dark brown glossy eyes and didn't say anything, but then he started moving around and like nobody was noticing him, even the 2 boys that went with him, and that's when I realized that his movements were just so unnatural or weird. The feeling that I had was not fear though, like you'd be scared of the unknown, like ghosts or demons or the dark or a horror movie or something, but this was a feeling that I had a few times when someone died or saw something really graphic and gore-related. Kind of like a really dark disgust, and my brain just rewired in a way, like I suffered a real psychological trauma or something. Anyway, he looked at me intensely, which at the time seemed like a really long period, and I just couldn't move. I now remember opening my mouth halfway and just kind of staring back at him, eyes wide open, and fixated my vision at him, but didn't want to make eye contact with his eyes. Subconsciously, for some weird reason, I think I told myself not to look, and he never spoke a word, and nobody else ever acknowledged him. He just went straight for the door after making those rounds in the house, and for a second he just stood under the door entrance and turned his head again to look at me. And he was completely pale white, and in a way that just kind of evoked the same feeling in me as before. And then he just left. I tried to gather myself and tell myself that there was nothing wrong and that the person was just someone my friend knew and just came into the house, and it was just kind of coincidental that nobody noticed him. I honestly forgot about the whole thing while I was outside walking in the freezing snow, feeling sleepy and tired, until I saw him again near a closed travel agency building, and he was ahead of me, leaning against the glass walls. He didn't seem to notice me, but I knew then that it was definitely him. I switched sides on the sidewalk to get some distance, and with one eye looking over in his direction. He noticed me halfway and kind of smiled shortly, and I couldn't see his face better because of the snow and the distance, but I noticed his mouth was a deep red, almost bloody, and after I saw that, I picked up the pace, worrying that he might follow, but he he just stood there. And shortly after, I was out of range and I was on my way home. Now, I tend to smoke a lot, and I had this irrational fear when I got home, and I lit up some cigarettes with my window open, and I thought that someone might come in, and I was thinking of him specifically. Though I do live in an apartment on the 15th floor. But nothing happened, of course, and eventually I went to sleep, and that was it. To this day, though, I remember vividly the same feelings I had when I encountered this man, and I just can't shake it up. I know that this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but I guess the only one word that comes to mind when I think of him is a sort of vampire. Though, strangely enough, it's not from any book or fiction or myth that I know of. But that's honestly kind of what he looked like. I could tell myself that this is nothing out of the ordinary, but the experience that I went through was anything but ordinary. It's kind of hard to explain why this